Hi, this is Kelly Haran, one of the organizers. We're just going to give it a minute for folks to arrive and then we'll get started. Hi, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and I'll start with a few housekeeping items while people still trickle in. So I wanted to let you know that we're going to be recording the webinar just so that you're aware of that. And if you have questions as Laura is talking, I'll introduce Laura in just a moment. If you'll write them in the questions tab that's in the panel to the right, or at least it's on the right of my screen, and I'll relay them to Laura when the time is right. And actually, if we could go ahead and test that out, if you could find where that questions tab is and type in where you are joining us from. And if you're joining us from one of our Guidepost schools as a parent or a staff member, if you could tell us which one, and we can sort of learn a little bit about who our audience is today. That would be really exciting. All right. Let's see, we've got someone says they're from Guidepost Montclair, one of our Virginia schools. Let's see, Ditmas Park. I'm not familiar with where that is, but that's exciting nonetheless. We've got someone from Deerfield or Deerfield campus here in Georgia, not too far from where I am, and Brooklyn. All right, great. So it looks like we've figured out where that is. Well, I'm very excited to introduce my colleague, Laura Kalama. She's going to be sharing her wisdom with us today, and I'd like to share a little bit about her background. So she received her bachelor's degree in music education and then spent over 15 years working with infants and toddlers. So before joining Guidepost in our Prepared Montessorian team, she led a Nido classroom at one of our Guidepost schools in California. And in her current role, she enjoys assisting new teachers, or guides as we call them, in their Montessori journey. So welcome, Laura. I'm gonna turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And thank you all for coming today. I'm really excited to be here with you and be a part of this Guidepost Montessori webinar series. So as we get started today, we're going to talk about freedom of movement. What does that mean? Why is it important? And how can we design an environment that supports this type of movement? So, of course, we want children to be free to move. That sounds like something, yes, of course we want that. But as you actually begin to sort of dissect it a little bit, there's a lot to unpackage with this concept. So let's sort of talk through it and see what that looks like. Watching a child makes it obvious that the development of his mind comes through his movements. So we Montessorians look at movement a little bit differently. What parent doesn't dread the teacher conference where they know that they might hear, Aiden just can't sit still? Sometimes people see movement as something that happens outside of learning. And it seems as if movement has taken a back seat to intellectual development. Well, Dr. Montessori saw things differently. She saw the relationship between the brain, the senses, and the muscles in a very different way. a true visionary in educational philosophy, she thought that it was a great error to separate movement from intellectual development. And she disagreed with the idea that movement is only for strengthening the cardiovascular system. So today we're going to dive into this idea of freedom of movement, why it's so important. We're going to discuss what freedom of movement looks like for infants. It looks a little bit different in the toddler years. We're going to talk about that too. We're going to discuss the prepared environment, because how we prepare the environment is what allows us to afford this freedom to children. And then we can end with a Q&A. If you have any sort of questions or thoughts that bubble up, feel free to write them in the chat, and then Ellie can relay them to me. So what is freedom of movement? Children acquire knowledge by acting and then reflecting on their experiences. So they learn through movement. Now, movement in the Montessori environment is about more than just getting the wiggles out. Montessori tells us that purposeful movement is what drives not only behavior, but also learning. Children are free to move about the Montessori environment because movement is a sensory activity that has direct connections to the brain. Dr. Montessori developed a method of education that not only acknowledges the child's need for movement, but it actually uses it to fuel academic learning. So if ever you've witnessed the beauty and the harmony of a Montessori classroom, you know firsthand that it actually is possible to achieve a calm and peaceful environment, all the while allowing movement. Actually, sort of paradoxically, if you look inside traditional classrooms that require children to stay seated for extended periods of time, that's where you actually find sort of more incidents of unruly and disruptive behavior. So when we look at this rambunctious and eager 2-year-old running into our classroom on the first day of school, we see a child that is on the cusp for the sensitive period of movement. We see a child whose mind and body are calling for an opportunity to concentrate. We see a child who is eager to extend his maximum effort to achieve something meaningful. And we see a need that is met through purposeful and intentional work. So when we talk about sensitive periods, that's a word that Montessorians use a lot, but let's dissect that a little bit. What is a sensitive period? I like to think of a sensitive period as a window of opportunity. It is a limited window of opportunity during which a child can acquire a new skill or concept more easily than any other time in their life. During this period, the child's interests are intensely focused on an important developmental work. And it's if they're driven by some invisible urge to practice these new skills to perfection. If we miss a sensitive period, this opportunity is never available again in the same way. So from birth, young children are in a sensitive period for movement. The freedom of movement in your child's Montessori environment affords ample opportunity to practice these emerging motor skills. What is freedom of movement for infants? During the first crucial 2 years of life, infants perfect the foundational movements and the muscle structure that they will depend on for the rest of their lives. Their balance, coordination, and core strength are all developed from birth, and then they're refined into the complex and coordinated movements we need for a healthy and active life. Freedom of movement and time spent working on the horizontal plane, both on back and belly, play a vital role in muscular development in young infants. It supports emerging motor skills. So rolling, reaching, sitting up, pulling up, learning to squat, even learning to fall down safely. This is essential work for a young child. What a transformation that happens in the first 2 years. Recall that newborns, the movement is reflexive and it's accidental. And then the child gradually gains control of her body and she begins moving intentionally to explore the world. Recall that over time, the child's movements become more and more refined, and as her goals get more sophisticated and her hand grows more dexterous. So what we see is this constant cycle of the mind sending instructions to the hand. The hand performs those instructions and then sends back certain sensory information to the mind. And then the mind sort of incorporates this new information and sends the message back, try again. So when we see a child moving and perfecting their movements, there's this constant cycle between the hand and the mind. In this way, movement and learning are absolutely linked. Also recall that the nature of human work, just about any kind of work that people do as adults, requires the mind and the body to work together in integration. So this is the nature of human work and human creativity throughout life. And it is also the nature of children. It's how they learn and how they work when they are children as well. So when we allow a child freedom of movement, there's all kinds of development that occurs. There's spatial awareness and equilibrium. Their dexterity improves. They can manipulate objects. We see lots of gross motor development, control of their fine motor skills. And we also see an increased stereognostic sense. And that is being able to touch something and without actually seeing it, sort of your mind's eye can see it. You can feel something and know what it is without looking. And again, this is through experience. This is through actually touching those things. Again, freedom of movement sounds great. Of course we want this for our children, but let's take a step back and actually consider. So for how much of the day is your child in charge of their own body? And for what portion of the day is their movement restricted? Most children today spend a considerable amount of time strapped into a car seat, a stroller, a baby carrier, a cute new bouncy seat, or a really expensive swing. But extended periods of time in various containers like this are missed opportunities for essential motor development. And again, this is a window of opportunity that can never be regained in quite the same way. In addition to that missed opportunity for motor development, too much time in containers like this can actually contribute to certain health conditions like scoliosis, torticollis, and hip dysplasia. So whenever possible, we recommend that we reduce the amount of time that infants spend in situations that restrict their mobility. There are many products on the market and many companies eager to sell them to you. And these products are very good at making it look like a child is in a certain position. So, you know, it looks as if this child is sitting. It looks like this child is standing. It may even look like this child is walking. But that is not actually what's happening here. The child is in a device that is putting them in a certain position. And so sometimes actually this can hinder the development that we actually want to see. Peeking inside a Montessori Nido classroom for the first time, it might be a little surprising. It usually generates questions from parents on tours or from new guides. You may notice that there are no cribs in use and there are no high chairs. Instead, every aspect of this environment is designed to afford children freedom of movement so that they can interact with the world around them. We have cushioned movement mats and rugs that allow the infant spaces to roll and to reach and explore new ways of moving. The environment promotes opportunities to crawl, to pull up, and to cruise at the pre-walking stage. It is an environment that is both safe and challenging. Your child's classroom is an environment that allows infants to be in positions that they can get into and out of on their own. Low tables and chairs enable a child to come to the table, to sit in a chair independently, rather than being placed into a high chair by someone else. Floor beds, instead of cribs, allow a child to easily access their resting space and to move to this area when they feel tired. It allows them to wake up without feeling stuck. As infant expert Magda Gerber cautioned, she said that every time we put an infant in a position she cannot change all by herself, we deprive her of moving freely, feeling her to feel passive, helpless, and less confident. So the freedom to move about the environment develops a child's keen interest in the world. It helps them recognize that they are part of the world, and it encourages a child to develop self-confidence in their own ability to act. So what are some ways that we can encourage gross motor development? Well, balls. Balls are a wonderful way to encourage gross motor development. The child is motivated to reach out for them, and then sometimes the ball rolls off just a little bit. That's where the encouragement for gross motor movement comes in. Notice the balls like these, they don't roll away. They're sort of protrusions that keep the ball from rolling across the room. So it's very great for this stage. It moves just a little bit away. We also want to think about the type of clothing that we're putting the child in. While this dress is adorable, it's going to make it very difficult for this child to move. We also want to provide opportunities to cruise and opportunities to pull up. We can anticipate that a child at this age will pull up on just about anything. So we do want to be mindful of safety, but we can provide things like this walking wagon. It is just the right amount of support, but it's not too fast. It doesn't roll away from them. Stairs are also wonderful for crawling and walking infants. And notice that at the one pictured here, the child has a chance to sort of cruise along, to pre-walk across. So this is another great way to support gross motor development. Now, it looks a little bit different in the toddler community. These children are wired to move. They love to move. But as young children become more coordinated, they also thrive on purposeful work that meets their desire for increased independence. So toddlers are free to move about the environment. They are free to choose work and engage in experiential learning. Our communities have low sinks and stepping stools that empower toddlers to accomplish tasks for themselves. Things like washing hands or filling a watering can that they will use to care for the plants in our community. This strategic setup affords toddlers a necessary opportunity to move, but more than that, it also calls upon them to move in a way that is careful and coordinated. Because toddlers are fascinated and challenged by the many enticing activities around them, they also are called upon to really work hard to manage their movements. And sometimes they demonstrate intense focus with these tasks. So in this way, gross motor movement and intellectual development are working, again, just seamlessly together. So between 12 and 24 months, the child is refining their eye-hand coordination, learning to manipulate objects in more purposeful and sophisticated ways. So movements are getting more precise. The child can do more complicated puzzles. The child is also gaining confidence in walking and carrying objects from place to place. So this shows a development in balance and equilibrium. So this is a wonderful chance to provide work, really engaging and rewarding work for the child. So we can think about things like screwing and unscrewing, opening and closing, pouring things, cutting, gluing, sewing. All kinds of specialized movements are happening at this age. And these specialized movements give the child specialized abilities that come along with that. We want to expose him to a variety of these different types of movements through the materials in our classroom. So we have increasingly complex manipulatives, especially ones that invite the child to use both hands together, or things that maybe call upon him to do some sort of sorting. Also consider the activities that call upon the child to move in a coordinated way, like filling a heavy bucket with water and then carrying it very carefully so that the water doesn't spill. This type of maximum effort is really important for young toddlers. They are eager to feel strong and equipped and capable to meet the task, the needs of the task that the world asks of them. So if they want to lift something heavy, invite them to help move the table for our community snack. If they want to practice treating something with precision or finesse, let them help pour water from a breakable glass pitcher. Now, sometimes in the environment, a Montessori guide will actually design the environment to encourage movement. So this is a material out of our toddler classrooms. This is cloth washing. So there's a little washboard here, pitchers or buckets for carrying water. There's this whole process around washing the cloths. And when the child is done, they are invited to place the cloths that they washed on the drying rack with a clothespin. So here you can see that this is laid out in a very sequential manner, but if a guide observes that the children seem to be craving a little bit more movement, something that the guide may do is to put this drying rack on the other side of the classroom. And so as the child completes all of the steps in washing the cloths, then they have this opportunity to walk across the classroom, to walk like carrying something that's maybe a little bit squishy and wet, to not forget where they're going on that trip across the classroom. So a lot of logical thinking and sequencing is happening here, along with this desire, this necessity to move. Now, toddlers crave movement, but it's not just any type of movement. In my experience, we take a group of children outside and you feel like they need to sort of get the crazies out. But once children go crazy, they just kind of stay at that level. They stay crazy. So that's not what we're looking for here. Chaotic and frenzied movement is different from the purposeful movement that we are aiming for in our communities. We're looking for real activities that call upon the child to use their body in a focused and a challenging way. So this is the type of movement that encourages children to demonstrate remarkable self-control and focus. Now, how do we do this? We achieve freedom of movement by leaning very heavily on what we call the prepared environment. So we Montessorians sort of revere the prepared environment. We consider the environment on an equal level of importance as the guide, as the teacher in our classrooms. So as the guide, it is my job to connect the child with the materials and the environment, but the environment itself is actually responsible for most of the teaching. So let's sort of unpackage this a little bit. And what do we mean by the prepared environment? Well, before we get to like a prepared environment, let's just start with an environment generally. It's just a place, really. Our natural environment is the world we live in without any changes, and animals adapt themselves to the natural environment. But as human beings, we create specific environments for specific purposes. Humans design particular environments for themselves that are intended to meet some sort of particular need or purpose, to respond to some particular situations. So, for example, a hospital is designed to respond to medical needs. An office is designed to respond to the needs of people who work a particular type of job. Or a park is designed for the purpose of enjoying the outdoors, and so on. What does it look like for children? What is the prepared environment for children? Well, Maria Montessori looked around the world in which she lived, and she found that there was no environment prepared and designated for the particular needs of children. Even in the child's own home, she saw that almost everything was designed for adults. Adult body proportions, adult strength and physical abilities, adult purposes. And nothing was designed for the child's proportions or the child's abilities, for the child's interests. And maybe that the child was not allowed to touch things that might be breakable, to play in areas that he might make messy, or to climb on things that might fall. The child was like an unwelcome stranger in his own home. So Dr. Montessori set out to design a physical environment that was right for the child, a place that was his own, a place where he could meet his own needs independently and engage in activities that satisfied him and furthered his development. So this is a space that we are preparing specifically to meet the particular needs of children. We're always asking ourselves, we're preparing an environment where A, the child can succeed, and B, is motivated to explore. So we're trying to set children up for success, creating situations where they can do everything that's in the classroom, or at least everything that they've been introduced to. For example, if there's an adult-sized sink with no stepping stool, the child cannot wash his hands. But it's more than just ensuring that they can do everything. It's also ensuring that they are eager and excited to try new things. So we want the materials on the shelf to call to the child. So how we display things is important, and that we have set up an environment that sets children up for success, creating these conditions where they can flourish independently and joyfully. So we are looking for materials that the child can use with just the right amount of challenge and difficulty. We're always observing ways that we can tweak the environment to have the child be more successful in their efforts. If I can identify that I'm routinely having to help with a certain task, that is a cue for me that I can ask myself, well, what can I do? How can I arrange this differently where the child wouldn't need me or wouldn't need me as much? Can I set this up so that he is capable of doing it independently? So what are some of the things that we do to make the environment accessible to children? Remember that if things aren't accessible, the child won't choose them. So we have open shelves and materials at the edge of the shelf. We want it to feel like materials are just leaping off the shelf into the child's hands. We have choice, but limited choice, not too many things. Notice that everything is displayed right at the child's eye level, even the art on the wall. We are asking ourselves questions about, is this the right size? Is this the right weight? If you can't like sort of pick it up easily with just a few fingers, is it going to be too heavy for a child? So you can put yourself in the child's shoes sort of at their level and look at your classroom, look at your home. What do you see? Here are some of the aspects of a prepared environment that you could easily incorporate into your home. So low shelves and activities that are contained very neatly in baskets and trays. This allows the child to carry that work to a table or to a work rug. Again, meeting that need, that desire for movement. We can incorporate toddler-sized tables and chairs for both work and for eating. We can allow a child access to clothing and personal care items so that they can take a more active role in caring for themselves. A floor bed is a wonderful way to give a child freedom of movement so that they can go to their bed when they're tired and wake up without feeling stuck. Stepping stools are really key, and even sometimes with a stepping stool, the water can be just out of reach. So a faucet extender, it can be really helpful in allowing a young child access to water so that they can wash their hands, care for plants, things like that. This can take a little bit of getting used to if it's a new idea, but the best place for infants is on the floor. We have this tendency to want to put our precious things in boxes, and I completely understand it. But truly, the best place for infants is on the floor. So this is a lovely space for a needle child. Remembering that from the time a child begins to move, that she is becoming independent. We want to prepare our homes, maybe or several rooms if we can, so that a young child can move about freely and safely. We want to make sure that there are interesting activities in view, within reach, and so that your child can explore without assistance. This is a lovely space for an older child, maybe a young toddler or someone from the toddler community. And looking at this, I hope that you notice it is accessible, tables and chairs where the child can come and sit down himself, that it is orderly. We believe that external order helps to create internal order for the child, so always orderly, clean, and appealing. And also, again, notice that there are choices, but not too many choices. It would be better to offer only, say, 3 or 4 things on a shelf and then rotate those things to keep the interest up. Do you want your children to be able to hang up their jacket or hang up their towel? We need to design the environment to support this. So the simple addition of a coat rack and a towel hook at an accessible level invites the child to participate with this task. If we want to involve children with chores or household routines, we can again design this into the environment. So something like setting the table, pouring a glass of water, sweeping, wiping a spill. We can invite the child to help with this task. They probably love to help with this task. But if we design the environment like this, they can do these tasks independently. If we want children to be able to dress themselves, they need access to their clothing. Now, again, we Montessorians are always sort of like we have on our observation lens. So as I look at this photo, that bar seems a little bit high for the child to be successful. But what I really love about it is that he has choice, but limited choice. This is especially important for young toddlers, where maybe to look at a full closet and decide what to wear is a little bit overwhelming. But if we can narrow it down to say just a few choices or something off of this shelf or out of this drawer, helps the child sort of narrow what can seem to be an overwhelming number of options. So this is how we use freedom of movement in our Montessori environments. I hope that you have a couple of ideas of how you can incorporate this at home as well. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can answer some questions.
Thank you, Laura. That was great. I had a question that just came in asking, how do you guide children without restricting their freedom?
Offering choices is a wonderful way. So maybe, you know, not like, do you want to wash your hands, but would you like to wash your hands at this sink or this sink? So offering two choices, that works really well. The other thing that I'm finding just it always works is modeling the behavior that we want to see in the child. So we can't sort of, you know, assume that they know how to do it. I'm going to show you how to do it, show you how to do this task, and then invite you to have a turn. So modeling and then offering choices so the child is still the driver in the process.
That makes sense. Could you talk a little bit about how you might incorporate music at home with your infant or toddler? That was a question that came up actually in my webinar, and I said that would be best addressed by you.
Thank you, Kelly. Yes. I've been a student of music my whole life, and I love to make music with children. So one of the big recommendations that I would say is that when you're making music at home, it's different than sort of like consuming music than just like turning on the radio and listening to it. We want to create circumstances where we're truly making music together. So one wonderful way to do that is through a cappella singing, really using our voices, letting them hear what it sounds like when we make music. I think about like, if you were going to learn to speak and you were going to learn to speak only by ever listening to recordings of people speaking, it would be really difficult. So that's sort of how I think about a cappella singing, is that we want the child to see music being produced real time. So even if you're not comfortable with singing, sort of just check that your child loves to hear you sing. Do it with enthusiasm and let them hear your voice. Let them hear you making music.
All right, we've got a question about sleep schedules. Lindsay asks, how can you promote healthy sleep schedules with a floor bed? For example, my toddler thrives on 2 naps each day, about 3 hours apart from one another. How can this be encouraged?
In terms of sleep, really relying on a strong routine, I think, is helpful. Not so much schedule based. Sometimes we can get too wrapped up in like the actual time of when things happen. Instead, a routine where we're really observing the child and looking for signs of fatigue. Sometimes, you know, when an older toddler has a harder time, that might indicate that they're ready to shift to 1 nap instead of 2, can be sort of one option there. Also with the floor bed, you know, in the beginning, maybe they need you sort of just to sit next to them and model what it is to calm your body, to calm your breathing, calm your mind. Sometimes with children, I like to call it resting instead of napping. And maybe that's just like semantics, but I think that the connotation is a little bit different, that I'm only asking you to sort of calm your body, and maybe, yes, that will lead to sleep, but also sort of acknowledging that I can't make you close your eyes. So really making the child the driver of the process as much as possible.
Sure. All right, I've got a question from Brenda who asks, could you please suggest where can we get more ideas to support gross motor development for a 9-month-old baby? Is there any website that you suggest we can get interesting material?
I'm hesitant to recommend a website in general because I don't know exactly. But I would say just observe your child, you know, sort of see what interests them, get down on the floor and work with them there, provide opportunities to sort of cruise around. It's amazing how naturally this gross motor development can happen when we sort of like stay out of the way a little bit. It's not a product. It's not always like something that we buy. This is going to happen in the child. We sort of trust the process, give them lots of time on the ground with engaging things that they can interact with. That's really the best thing that we can do.
All right, I think we could probably do an entire other webinar on this topic, potty training. Can you talk about potty training? My toddler shows interest when he's at home and naked. He can go on his own without any reminders. How do I integrate this readiness into other environments where he still uses a diaper?
Yeah, and that is totally another webinar. We could spend an hour talking about that for sure, but I would love to share a little bit about our approach. So, you know, even in the way that we view this, we use kind of different words. So we call it toilet learning and toilet independence. We think of it as like awareness. And so this toilet awareness sort of starts at birth, right? We are making the child aware of their bodily processes. Even when we think about like accidents, you know, we like to think of them as wet events. Like, this is not an accident. Your body did what your body is supposed to do. We're going to help sort of draw your awareness to this bodily process. This is what happened. This is what you can do next time. So it does sound like your toddler is showing a lot of the awareness that we are looking for in terms of toilet learning. It also sounds like you're off to a great start of removing the obstacle of actually pants. You know, sometimes that is something that toddler guides do when they have a lot of children in this toilet learning process, that they will let them go around the community in their like cloth underwear. And while that can look a little bit funny in the beginning, it's really about setting the child up for success. That sometimes just to make it to the restroom, to pull down the pants, like that's enough of a challenge. To add extra clothing can be a challenge. So during this period, really think about the type of clothing that your child is wearing. Elastic waist pants are helpful more than like buttons and zippers. And then once you get it at home, once you get it in a safe space, begin taking little journeys out, little adventures. And as a parent, like just try to put on your adventure hat and sort of like take a deep breath and let's see what happens, but I'm going to try to keep a smile on my face. Take a little walk to the park, take a short trip to the store. And with each transition, maybe when you arrive at the store, when you get to the park, invite the child to participate in toileting in a new space, in a new area.
Have another follow-up to toileting. It says, is it okay to use treats to encourage toilet independence? I've seen that online.
Certainly lots of parents do that. It's not really part of our approach because at some point we want the child to be able to do this for themselves, to do it on their own and to not ask for an M&M afterwards. We find that if you really focus on the whole process around it, that is a reward for the child. They love to be clean. They love to be in charge of their body. They love to care for their body. So, you know, an M&M never hurt anyone, but it's not the long-term solution here. So we don't use any sort of dangling carrots for toileting.
Sure. I have a question that asks a little more of a statement, I guess. Could you please share some more challenging activities that toddlers can be offered that helps them become confident of their movement?
Yes, so there's a lot of different ways that you can go about that. Let's think of it first from sort of a fine motor standpoint. Anytime we're asking children to do one task with one hand and something else with another, so something like cutting paper, where they're holding paper with one hand and sort of feeding it through, and then scissors with the other. That is a complicated task. Something like gluing with a fine brush, and you're inviting them to not have the glue come off the edge. Sometimes we can take the challenging part of any certain activity and make that the point of interest for the child. So like, I'm going to put droppers of oil, but I'm only going to do 2 drops. And that really calls upon the child to exercise a lot of finesse and a lot of fine motor control as they engage in a task. Pouring water, very exciting for young children. In terms of gross motor, I think about carrying things. So again, children love to extend maximum effort. They want to feel strong and empowered. So they can help us move things in the classroom. We invite them to help us move tables and chairs. We invite them to carry heavy buckets. When we're outside, challenging gross motor work, and again, this is sort of contrasted with the everybody go crazy. Nope, it's not that. It's throwing and catching. It's jumping off the ground with 2 feet up and down, and then maybe jumping forward. It's crab walking. It's raking leaves, something that is has a purpose.
Sure. I have a question. What if my child crawls off the floor bed? Couldn't that be dangerous?
If you're going to do this at home, now in our Montessori environments, it's different because even when the children are sleeping, they're always supervised. So it's a little bit different at school, but many of the families who have floor beds at home, you want to sort of consider the child's whole room to be this safe space. So you need to like think about the room from their perspective, make sure that any furniture is anchored to the wall so nothing can tip over, everything is safe at that level. And then if you need to, you can gate their door, or they have this safe area if you're concerned that they're going to leave their bed and you won't be there, or you won't be aware right away. So that is something that has worked really well for families at home.
All right, I have a question from Elise. She says, I'm thrilled with the idea of a Montessori environment for a child, and I'm looking at becoming a first-time mother soon. But a lot of this seems difficult to maintain as a single parent. Do you have any tips?
Everything is sort of more difficult at home. I will admit, when I have my teacher hat on, everything is for the children. I don't have all of these other projects, but when you come home, there's other demands. You need to make dinner, you need to do all of these other tasks. So again, how you design the environment to make it as friendly and as accessible for the child is going to be in your favor. It's amazing how few products it takes, how few devices, and rather the space where you and your child are going to be able to do things together. It's a little bit hard in the beginning, but as the child gets older, we want to involve them as much as possible. So, when it's time to have dinner, my children set the table. When there's a spill on the floor, they wipe it up because they see the need and they know how to fix it. They have been armed with this knowledge. So, like a newborn stage, it's challenging. It's beautiful, but it's challenging. But as they get older and as they acquire more skills, we want to just involve them as much as possible in what's happening in the family.
All right, this may be our last question unless something else comes through. Last question is, how do you deal with frustration? I want to encourage and help, but I don't want to take freedom away.
That's tricky, and it comes through observation, and I feel like the threshold is a little bit different for every adult and even for every child. So one general rule of thumb that works for me is I I don't offer help unless they ask for help. And sometimes that's really tricky. I watched my 3-year-old try to open a frozen yogurt, and he tried it with his hands, and then he tried it with his teeth. And then he went and he got scissors and he was trying to cut it, and like the yogurt is just melting. And I can see the mess happening in my head, but he was frustrated, but he hadn't yet asked for my help. And I literally had to just sit on my hands to wait. But he eventually persevered through this challenge. So wait until the child asks for help is one way to go about it. Sometimes even, you know, if the child is maybe visibly frustrated, they might be crying a little bit, but they're still trying. I would even maybe let them work through that a little bit more. I know sometimes when I'm frustrated, I might be upset, but I haven't given up yet. I'm still trying. So we can like acknowledge that and cultivate that from a young age. And then truly, if they kind of hit that point where work isn't happening anymore, we're over the edge in terms of frustration, that's where I might sit down next to them and say, how can I help? Or if I do this part, can you do this part? Like I'll get it halfway and then you finish. So those are some of my general like kind of first approaches in terms of knowing when to offer help and then how to offer help without just doing it for them.
That's great. I think that is it for questions, unless you have anything else to add, but thank you so much. This was incredibly informative.
Thanks, Kelly. And thanks everyone who came and asked questions. I enjoy freedom of movement.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Bye, everybody. I'm going to sign off.